Lillian Vance's husband had dragged her through the frozen underbrush with the same callous efficiency he used when slaughtering hogs, each yank on her torn sleeve promising a new constellation of bruises beneath her skin. When he finally released her crumpled body into a shallow ravine, spitting a curse about her worthless disobedience, the last thing she heard was the crunch of his boots retreating into the merciless winter silence. The cold seeped into her shattered ribs, and the taste of copper flooded her mouth, while the distant howl of a wolf reminded her that no one would ever come searching for a forgotten woman in this god-forsaken wilderness. High above on a granite outcrop, a solitary trapper named Thaddeus Cole paused in the act of resetting his beaver trap as his sharp, weather-worn eyes caught a flash of bloodied calico against the stark white snow below. Thaddeus had lived alone in these mountains for 15 years, deliberately avoiding the messy affairs of lowland folk. Yet something about the tiny broken form stirred a protective instinct he could not ignore. What this towering mountain man would do next, however, would not only snatch a dying woman from the jaws of a frozen grave, but would also ignite a chain of redemption that proved mercy could bloom even in the harshest soil. He descended the treacherous slope with the agility of a mountain goat, his heavy buffalo hide coat billowing behind him as he slid to her side and gently rolled her over to reveal a face so battered it was barely recognizable as a woman's. With a voice as steady as the bedrock beneath him, he whispered the words that would become an unbreakable covenant. "I won't leave you," before gathering her fragile form into his massive arms and carrying her up the treacherous trail toward his hidden cabin. For the next several days, Thaddeus tended her wounds with a tenderness that belied his rough exterior, cleaning the deep gashes with pine resin salve, spooning warm venison broth past her swollen lips, and never once straying farther than the woodpile outside his door. When Lillian finally awoke, her vision swimming into focus on a rough-hewn ceiling of logs and the scent of burning cedar, she instinctively recoiled in terror, expecting another blow from the man she had been forced to call husband. But instead of a fist, she found a pair of pale gray eyes watching her with such profound gentleness that she wept uncontrollably, the tears carving hot paths through the dry blood still clinging to her bruised cheeks. Thaddeus did not shush her or offer empty platitudes. He simply sat in his worn rocking chair, whittling a piece of pine into the shape of a small songbird, and let her sorrow pour out until she had emptied herself of the years of abuse that had nearly destroyed her. As Lillian slowly regained her strength, she learned that her rescuer had once lost a young wife and infant son to scarlet fever many winters ago, a sorrow that had driven him into the high lonesome to bury his heart beneath the snowdrifts. She discovered, too, that this giant of a man who wrestled bears and skinned elk also kept a worn volume of Shakespeare beside his bunk, and he would read aloud to her by firelight, his rumbling voice breathing life into the sonnets as if they were prayers. When spring thaw finally released the mountain from its icy grip, Lillian was no longer the shattered wraith he had carried up from the ravine, but a woman whose eyes sparkled with a strength she had never known she possessed. One afternoon, as they stood together repairing the sagging porch rail, their hands touched and a current of something unspoken passed between them, but Thaddeus gently stepped back, telling her she owed him nothing and that her freedom was the only payment he would ever accept. Lillian, however, stepped forward, placed her palm flat against his chest where his heart beat a steady, powerful rhythm, and declared that her decision to stay had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with the man who had shown her what real love looked like. Before they could explore the fragile new landscape of their feelings, the sound of a horse snorting at the edge of the clearing shattered the peace, and Lillian's face drained of all color as she recognized the cruel silhouette of her husband, Vernon, astride a lathered mare with a rifle resting across his thigh. Thaddeus stepped in front of her without hesitation, his own rifle appearing in his hands as if conjured by the wind, and he addressed the intruder in a tone as cold and sharp as a January icicle, warning Vernon that he had exactly one chance to ride back down the mountain and never return. Vernon, too arrogant and consumed by rage to recognize that he faced a man who had survived 100 blizzards and a dozen grisly encounters, dismounted with a sneer and raised his rifle. But before his finger could even brush the trigger, Thaddeus had already closed the distance and disarmed him with a single fluid motion that left the abuser sprawling in the mud. With the kind of cold efficiency that spoke of a past he never discussed, Thaddeus bound Vernon's wrists with rawhide, hoisted him onto the back of his own horse, and announced that they would be taking a long ride to the territorial marshal's office, where justice would finally be served by a court of law rather than the barrel of a gun. Lillian watched her tormentor being led away, a man who had once seemed like an unstoppable giant of cruelty, now reduced to a whimpering, pathetic creature, and she felt the last chains of her old terror snap and fall away into the mud beneath her boots. When Thaddeus returned 3 days later, his testimony having ensured Vernon would spend the rest of his miserable years in a territorial prison, he found Lillian waiting on the cabin porch with a meal of fresh trout and wild greens spread out on the rough-hewn table she had scrubbed until it gleamed. That evening, beneath a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed to be dripping silver across the black velvet sky, Thaddeus knelt beside her on the very spot where he had first carried her to safety and asked if she would do him the profound honor of becoming his wife. Lillian, her eyes brimming with tears that were no longer born of sorrow but of a joy so immense she thought her heart might burst, pulled him to his feet, wrapped her arms around his thick neck, and whispered that she had been his from the moment he had spoken those 4 sacred words. They were married in a sunlit meadow by a traveling preacher who had heard rumors of the mountain man's extraordinary mercy, and the simple ceremony was witnessed only by a curious black bear who watched from the tree line before ambling back into the deep forest. Together, they transformed the once lonely cabin into a haven for wounded souls, taking in stray travelers, offering warm meals and a safe bed, and proving that the love born from mercy could multiply outward until it touched every corner of the high country. Years later, when folk in the distant valley spoke of the giant trapper and his gentle-voiced wife, they did so with a reverence reserved for saints, and many a desperate soul climbed that treacherous mountain path, seeking the healing that only compassion and a hot bowl of stew could provide. Lillian often reflected that the most horrific night of her life, the brutal beating in the frozen ravine, had been the very hinge upon which her entire existence swung from despair into an abundance of love she had never dared to imagine possible. Thaddeus, whose own scarred heart had been restored by the courage of a woman who refused to be defined by her wounds, would simply hold her close as the fire crackled and repeat the vow that had started it all. I won't leave you, not ever, not through any storm this world can muster. If this mountain man's fierce mercy and Lillian's journey from brokenness to wholeness has moved something deep within your spirit, then you already know why we labor so diligently to bring these authentic frontier tales to life at Western Tales Official each and every week. We invite you with genuine warmth to press that like button, subscribe with the bell activated, and leave a comment sharing how this story of redemption spoke to your own heart, because we read every word and treasure this global community of story lovers who keep the spirit of the West alive. Remember that even in the darkest ravine, a voice may whisper, I won't leave you, and that single promise can ignite a love so powerful that it reshapes not only 2 broken souls, but the entire world that witnesses their unbreakable bond.